Welcome to Small Talk Daily for Friday, September 26, 2008. This morning we'll continue with our Seaside blog example, and what we're going to do today is go through and add a login screen. The way we're going to do that is to create a custom session, attach that custom session to both the login screen we create and to the existing blog view screen here, and make sure that users who are logged in have specific rights. They can go in and edit posts and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and get started with that. We'll open up a browser, and we'll go down to our package, and what we're going to do is create a new class. So we're going to create one called blog login UI, and this one will be coming off seaside.wa component again, and we're going to give this an instance variable called user, so we'll say OK to that. And then we also need to create a new session class. So we're going to create a new class called blog session, and we're going to have that come off of seaside.wa session, and we're going to give this an instance variable too. Call that current user, and we'll hit OK with that. So now what we have to do is hook up this session and create all the code for login UI. Now it turns out there's a fair amount of code in login UI. Rather than have you watch me write each one of these methods in, given my typing skills and all of that, I'm going to go ahead and put that code in, pause the recording for a bit, and then come back and explain all the code I added. So the first thing I've done is I've gone ahead and I need to register this as a top-level application. So I'm going to execute this code I added, and that'll give us a new entry point. I've also added a can-be-root method over here so that it can exist at the top level. Then I've got the instance code to walk through. Let's take a look at that. So first we have an initialize. We want to create a new instance of a user, and this is in the login UI. And what we're going to do is allow the user to log in and with a username and password and see what's going on. So here's our user class, which we created when we filed code in a couple days ago. So going back to the login UI, let's go ahead and look at the rendering code. Render content on. This is the main piece, and this is one of the things that really is nice about Seaside, is look at the way I'm creating this form. I'm going ahead and setting up a div, and then I'm calling this class login again so that at some point I could add CSS to this. And then here I'm putting in a paragraph, and then putting in this login to post edit, just a string. And now I have a form. All I tell it to do is put up a form, and I'm going to tablize this, put up a row with the render username, render password, and render buttons. And what this means is that instead of having one big hairy piece of HTML here, I'm writing this the same way I would write user interface code. I've decided I want to render the username fields here, password stuff here, button stuff here. So I've already refactored this. So let's go to the username code. So I put out a piece of table data, text username, and text input. And notice again, the nice thing about this is for capturing input, I don't have to worry about hidden fields. I don't have to worry about the IDs for these fields. I don't have to worry about lining this all up and capturing it. Seaside does that for me. Same thing for the password. Look over here, tell it I want the password text, and then here, password input. Again, it handles password fields for me. I don't need to do anything special. Finally, let's look at the buttons. Over here, I have my submit button, and the callback is the code in here. So when I submit, I want to validate the login. So this is kind of interesting. I have two submit buttons. I can either go ahead and summon up a login screen, or I can just cancel, meaning I don't want to log in, I just want to go to the blog because I don't have access rights. So this means that if somebody stumbles into this login UI themselves who isn't a valid user, they can still go to the blog by hitting cancel. So finally, let's go to the validation code. Actually, before I do that, let me just mention this call. This is one of the cool things about Seaside is this is very much like bringing up a user interface with a dialog box. What happens here is that the current rendering is going to be replaced by whatever gets called out to. So what I'm calling out to is the blog root UI. So if the user hits cancel, we just call out. And if we look at our testing code, the validate login, it's also going to use a call. What it's doing is it's checking to see if I have a valid user, and then it's going to cache that user in the session. Now we're not going to really get to using this much today, but I'm caching that information. And then finally, I call the root UI. So no matter which path I go down, even if the user is valid or invalid, I'm going to call the root UI into existence and just get off the login screen. The only thing that's going to be different is there may or may not be a user cached into the session. So there's one other thing we have to do to configure all this. That means we have to come back out here to our Seaside browser, and we go to the config option here. Now you'll notice that if I hit config for all of my entry points, I have these configure options. So let's go to blog view, we'll hit configure, and let's go scrolling down a bit, and you'll find I have my root component. I'm not going to do anything with that. I have my session class. It's defaulting to WA session, but I can override that. And if I scroll down again, you'll find that what's happened here is I now have a possibility of selecting these various other things. I'm going to give it blog session. And then I have to hit save. Then I want to do one other thing. I want to go back out to the top, and I want to select blog login config. So let's go to login, configure, and we'll want to do the same exact thing. So we'll go to the session class, hit override, then we'll come down here, find WA session, replace it with blog session, and then hit save, and now that's all done. So that's pretty much everything that we need to do. Everything should work. So let's go ahead and see how that happens. So we'll come back out to the top level of Seaside, and I still have my blog view option, which takes me here where I'd expect it to go, but I also have this login option. So let's see where that takes me. I've got my standard form here. So now if you looked at the workspace we had the other day, you'll notice that the user is just Fred and Flintstone. So assuming that I can actually spell Flintstone, we'll try hitting login, and it takes us there. Now notice that Firefox is already prompting me whether or not I want to remember this password. So I've successfully logged in and my session has that cached. Let's go back out to the top though, and we'll try the blog login, and we'll just hit cancel. Notice I end up in the same place, and that's because of the way that call worked. If I hit cancel, notice we just called the UI and didn't cache any information. If I hit login, we cached the information, and then we called the interface. So that pretty much wraps it up for today. We've created a custom session, attached it to our two user interface entry points, and we've gone ahead and created a valid way of logging in. So we'll pick this up next week. Until then, have fun with Smalltalk.